Thanksgiving turned into a nightmare when my sister found out I had $12 million, and my entire family kept threatening me to give it to her because they believed she deserved it more. Sarah's entire life had been a series of days spent in the shadows of neglect. When she was a child, everything was fairly normal until her sister Rachel was born. All of the attention from their mother and father shifted entirely to Rachel, who was treated as the fragile special child, while Sarah was left behind. Her mother, obsessed with keeping Rachel safe from any potential illness, began to focus entirely on her, while Sarah was forgotten. Whenever Sarah showed even the slightest sign of being sick, she was immediately sent away to stay with her grandmother or aunt, as if her mere presence posed a threat to Rachel's health. In those moments, Sarah didn't know what to do but remained silent, hiding in her small room, where she found solace only in the books about art and antiques her grandmother had left her. There were no praises, no words of encouragement. Her achievements, no matter how impressive, were always ignored. While she tried to excel in school and other areas, she received nothing but indifference from her parents. Sarah couldn't understand why, no matter what she did, she remained invisible in her own family. This feeling of being overlooked, of never being good enough, gradually carved itself into her heart. Despite all her efforts to prove her worth, it became clear that she was always meant to be a shadow, unnoticed by the people who should have loved her the most. The lack of attention from her family was not just a physical pain, but a deep emotional wound that lasted throughout Sarah's childhood. Every time she achieved something remarkable, winning first place in a science competition, or scoring high on exams, rather than receiving praise, she was met with silence from her mother and father. They only cared about Rachel, who was always surrounded by special attention. Her mother never even glanced at Sarah's accomplishments, instead focusing solely on Rachel's doctor's appointments and health schedules. In those moments, Sarah felt as though she didn't exist in her own family, no matter how hard she tried. The sense of abandonment became more pronounced, and Sarah began to wonder if she was even deserving of love, or if she was just an inconvenience to everyone around her. She started to rely on herself more and more, no longer waiting for approval from anyone, and instead found comfort in the things she could achieve independently. Family, once a place of refuge, had become a source of pain, as every time Sarah saw Rachel being lavished with praise, she felt the crushing injustice of being ignored. Those were the years marked by silent tears, as Sarah silently wished she could be Rachel, the one who received love and attention without ever having to prove herself. The feeling of being excluded from all the joy, all the loving gazes in the family, made Sarah increasingly resent herself. She couldn't understand why she had to endure these things when she hadn't done anything wrong. But what she was facing wasn't just indifference or a simple lack of attention. Every time she did something to prove her worth, her mother would turn to her father and say that Sarah was too old to need attention. And Rachel? She was always the center of every conversation. Every time Sarah tried to seek praise, her mother would say she didn't need help because she was grown up. But why could no one see the numbness in her heart when she could clearly feel the pain of emotional deprivation? Sarah gradually realized that if she didn't rise up on her own, she would never be recognized for who she truly was. She began to immerse herself in her own passions, books about art, antiques, where she found a sense of being valued and admired even though not by her family. Long nights alone in the dark room, she truly found herself through the old jewelry her grandmother had left behind, the beautiful gemstones and antiques that she could organize, study, and find value in. From the hard study sessions and hours of solitary work, Sarah built a solid foundation for herself. She started working at an antique authentication company and gradually realized that not only was she good at it, but she could also build a respectable career without any support from her family. Yet all of those successes were still not enough to erase the deep sense of hurt, especially when she saw Rachel, in perfect health, still surrounded by the attention and care of their parents, while she had to endure every hardship alone. It was an injustice she could not accept. The day she realized she could stand on her own and make money was also the day the feeling of being alone in my own family surged like a rolling wave. She began to notice that all her efforts over the years were not for recognition or love. She did everything just to prove that she deserved something special, free from the constraints of indifference. All that pain became a powerful motivator when Sarah decided that one day she would make her family acknowledge her struggles, no matter how much they continued to ignore her. When Sarah dared to expose the truth about her wealth, the $12 million became a testament to her resilience and self-reliance. But instead of admiration or pride, all she received was envy and a sense of betrayal. The entire family, especially Rachel, kept demanding that she share her wealth, and none of them thought about the years Sarah had endured, the times she had created hope for herself amidst her family's indifference. This broke Sarah's heart, as everything she had ever dreamed of suddenly became meaningless in their eyes. The feeling of helplessness made her unable to stay silent any longer, and that was the moment Sarah knew that she didn't need to live forever in the shadow of her family, that she was strong enough to rise and rewrite her own life. When Sarah decided to step out from under her family's shadow, she was ready to face whatever was ahead. She was no longer the child sitting in her room, trying to prove her worth in silence. Her success in the antique authentication business, the growth of the company, everything she had built from scratch, was the result of a life that no one in her family acknowledged. Every time she walked into a meeting with million-dollar contracts, important collaborations with collectors, she would ask herself why, when everything was within reach, her family still couldn't see her as a person of value, someone with real success. But what made Sarah feel the most bitter was that when she finally achieved the career of her dreams, when she stood at that peak, her family began to rush in demanding what she had earned. The money she had accumulated from her work in antique authentication, worth millions of dollars, became something they wanted to seize. She could never forget that day, the day Rachel, her younger sister, stood before her with a look full of ambition, demanding that Sarah share her wealth. "You deserve it more than anyone," Rachel said, with a tone that held no guilt. Those words were like a slap to Sarah's face, making it impossible for her to suppress the rising feelings of frustration and hatred in her heart. Sarah had spent her childhood witnessing the favoritism Rachel received, all the opportunities she had while Sarah struggled with invisibility in the family. Her achievements were never enough for her mother and father to notice, while Rachel only needed to cough once, feel tired once, and the whole family would pour their attention onto her. But when Sarah had done something her family never imagined, built a career of her own, and stood on her own 2 feet, they only saw her as a tool to satisfy their own ambitions. They didn't care about the long nights she spent awake, the sweat and tears in her work, the pressures she faced every day. On Thanksgiving, when Sarah didn't hesitate to open up and reveal her $12 million worth, her family didn't feel proud or offer a word of praise. Instead, they only made crude demands and acted as though they were betrayed. They began saying that she owed them, that she had to share her wealth because they deserved it more. Sarah felt like she was pushed into a battle with no way out. She had waited for recognition from her family for years, and now, when she had everything, she received nothing but coldness and painful greed. The words of her mother, of Rachel, felt like knives stabbing Sarah's heart. She didn't just feel abandoned, she felt exploited to the core. That was the turning point. She was no longer afraid to speak the truth, no longer afraid to cut ties with those toxic relationships. Sarah decided that not only did her family need to live a new life, but she herself did too. And when she decided to sever all financial ties with her family, when she ended the unlimited support she had given them, it was a complete liberation. But it was also an indescribable pain. It was the pain of betrayal, the pain of not being loved, but it was also the strength of a woman who had enough courage to choose herself. She no longer expected forgiveness from her family. She didn't need their recognition anymore. She had learned to stand on her own, and that was the most important thing. When Sarah left the party, taking the Hermes bag her mother had once sarcastically called a replica, she felt a strange sense of freedom rise within her. The freedom was not from money, but from herself, from no longer being controlled by her family's unreasonable demands, and that was Sarah's greatest victory. A few days after Sarah decided to sever all financial ties with her family, her life was far from the peace she had imagined. The first few days after leaving the Thanksgiving dinner, where everything had exploded, Sarah faced the harsh reality that nothing she had done over the years was enough to change her family. Although she had left the family and was living her own life, the tension and the feeling of betrayal still lingered in her mind. The constant messages and calls from her family, especially from her mother and Rachel, made her feel like she was trapped in an endless battle. Her mother kept calling and texting, but not to apologize or acknowledge the mistakes, but to blame her. "What did we do wrong that you treat us this way? You have everything now, why won't you share with the family?" These words echoed in Sarah's head like an arrow cutting through her heart. Her mother, who had always seen her as the invisible child, now wanted her to share her wealth for the sake of family. Her mother even blamed her, saying, "Rachel needs money to continue her studies, and we can't let her take on debt without help." Each of these words struck Sarah's self-esteem, as she remembered the years she struggled in loneliness, with no one to help her, no one to care. Rachel, her younger sister, kept posting cruel messages on Facebook. She wrote long posts about how Sarah had hidden her wealth and abandoned the family. She wrote, "We helped her when she needed us, and now she betrays us. She lives in luxury while we struggle with debts." These words not only angered Sarah, but also made her heart ache with the falsehood. She had spent her whole life silently helping the family, but when she achieved success, they saw it as betrayal. She felt like a sinner in her own family, and she couldn't take it anymore. The next day, when Sarah went to work, she had no idea that her family would show up at her workplace, standing right at the receptionist's desk. They told the receptionist they wanted to authenticate some antiques. Rachel, with a calm expression, wore the designer bag she had just bought, while her mother criticized Sarah's spending habits, saying, "You shouldn't live like this, so many people need you." That scene nearly broke Sarah. All the pain, all the disappointment, came crashing down like a wave, but she remained silent, looking at her mother and Rachel with eyes full of unspeakable sadness. She no longer wanted to please them. Sarah had endured this pressure for too long. Yes, she had given too much without receiving anything in return, except indifference and exploitation. And when she saw herself facing them again, she no longer wanted to keep any affection for them. She cut off all support, not because she was selfish, but because she was exhausted. She had loved them with all her heart, but they had never valued her love. They only saw her as a tool to satisfy their own ambitions and interests. When Sarah decided to end all contact with her family, when she protected herself from their approach and unreasonable demands, that was when she truly found herself again. She no longer needed to live in their shadow, no longer needed to pretend to be the person her family wanted her to be. Sarah realized that living authentically, doing what was right for herself, was the greatest victory she could achieve. And that was true freedom. When she had cut off the burdens and walked her own path,